Hey, what's up everyone? Welcome to my very first critique of your images that you submitted here on my YouTube channel. I think I'm gonna call it Q Critiques. I don't know, since I have all the rest of the shows with like Q reviews and all that kind of stuff, maybe I'll do like Q Critiques. But anyway, last week I asked you guys to submit your images so that I could critique them here on the channel. And I said I was going to do a live stream here on YouTube to basically critique those images, but what had happened was I started to do this live stream. I was setting everything up and the gear that I had set up wasn't working. And the only option that I really had was to live stream from my laptop. But the last time I tried that, basically having the software running and then having the live stream software running, the fan was like super loud and it just didn't sound good. And I didn't want it to be a low quality type thing. So I thought about it. How can I fix this? How can I make this better? And I figured this out. I'll just record myself on the camera and then I'll screen grab basically everything so you can see it. And that's how we're going to do it. That's the format for today. So I have 10 images that I'm going to critique today, and then I have an additional 10 images that I'm going to critique in the next episode. But to kind of get things set up, because you're probably watching me critique images here for the very first time. Don't believe I've ever done this on YouTube, actually. I've done some critiques on Facebook, but never on YouTube, so it's probably the first time you're seeing this. The goal behind my critiques is to help you to develop your eye and to become a better photographer. With that being said, all of the opinions that I'm going to tell you about these images are my own opinions. They're based on my experience, they're based on my personal taste in art and in tech, which I'll talk about here in a few moments. So don't take this the wrong way. Don't take this like I'm bashing you if you are the person that created the image, or if you're watching this and you didn't submit any images, don't take this as any type of bash or critique, because really my goal is to improve your photography. And speaking of that, if you have not joined the group on Facebook, I'll put the link in the description, and it's actually in the description for all of my videos. I invite you guys to join the group, submit your images there so that everybody could take a look at them and critique them. However, with that being said, we're going to do future critiques as well, and it's going to be through that Improve Your Photography Facebook group. So if you're not a member, definitely join. It's free. All right, so we have some images here, and what I want to do is I want to tell you how I'm critiquing these shots. What I'm really looking for is kind of a good mix between the art of a portrait and the technical side, right? The lighting, the settings, your choice of focal length, all of these different things. So that's kind of how I'm going to be critiquing these images. I'm going to critique it from my own personal taste in art. And then also talking about the technical, which some of it is to taste, but you know, if you kind of messed up technically, it's honestly an easy thing to fix. So with that being said, let's take a look at our first image. Okay, so I have my first image here loaded up into Capture One, and some of these images that were submitted actually have the EXIF data, so we could see what the settings were, the focal length it was shot at. And I believe, I'm going to take a look here. Yeah, some of the images have the EXIF data, so I can see the camera, the lens choices, settings, and all of that good stuff. What I want to do is, if I see the image and I see that it's a technical thing that's kind of standing out to me, I'll refer to the EXIF data if possible and kind of talk to you about maybe how you could approach it a little bit differently. So anyway, let's just get started. So the very first image that we have here is a really intriguing portrait, really interesting expression, great contact with the camera. The settings here were f2, 1/160th of a second, and ISO 100. And I'm going to maximize, let's see, let's bring this over here. So you can see it was a Sony a7R II. Shot with the 85mm 1.8 lens, and those were the settings there. So let's talk about this image, because this is one of the higher quality images that resolution wise that was sent to me, so I do have the ability to kind of punch in and really inspect it. The very first thing that I always look at when I'm looking at a portrait, whether it's my own or if I'm looking at other people's portraits, is to zoom in and take a look at the eyes. if you have portraits where the eyes are soft or out of focus, don't be surprised if my critique is very short and very harsh. The eyes have to be sharp and they have to be in focus, regardless of what settings it is that you're using. There's a lot of ways to be able to do that. So I'm zooming into this image and there's a couple of things. So it looks like the eyes are like 90% in focus, all right? I don't know if maybe in the raw file it was a little more in focus, but as I'm looking at this image and I've kind of zoomed in here, you can see on the left side here that this little braid is pretty sharp, but this one here is out of focus. Quite a bit of the skin is defocused, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I'm not against portraits that have been shot wide open. Sometimes if people's skin texture isn't great, then shooting wide open is a great option because it's an easy way to blur the skin and not have to do it in post where it ends up looking a little bit odd. But as I'm looking at this image and I'm kind of scrolling around, it looks like there was a lot of skin smoothing that was done to this image. So the good first. Love the expression, love the styling. I love the location, the choice of having these little leaves in the foreground, and then you have your subject there in the middle, and then you have a kind of interesting defocused area in the back. I think that's all cool. The makeup looks great. If I was looking at this portrait from far away and not inspecting the details, I would say that this is a stellar portrait. However, once I zoom into it, there's a few things that I'm looking at. Obviously the first one being the skin being very, very blurry. Part of that is because it was shot at f2. However, I would venture to guess that some of this was also done in post-production, because if you shoot this at f2, you should have quite a bit more texture in the face than what you're currently seeing right now. So what I would tell you is, and also looking at the eyes here, at the hairs underneath the eye here, they're sharp, but they're not super sharp. So this is where I was saying that maybe it's a little bit out of focus. It looks like it wasn't hit straight on. So you want to make sure for your portraits, number one, that you're getting the eyes in focus. And if you have to choose a wider aperture in order to be able to do that, by all means do that. I'm not going to be someone that tells you that you buy an 85 1.8 lens and you should always shoot at 85 1.8. That's not the case. In this scenario, I would have probably opened up a little bit. If you're at f2, maybe I would even go to f2.2 or f2.8 so that I could get more texture in the face, because as it is right now, everything about this portrait I love, with the exception that I feel like I'm viewing this as if I had beer goggles because of how blurry it is. All right, so the lips are really sharp and in focus, looks beautiful, but overall there's a softness to the image that I think kind of takes it away from this like stellar professional type of portrait and puts it into a different category that I don't think you need to be in. So try not to smooth the skin and you have a fantastic image. You could do that through shooting at a higher aperture and just being a little bit lighter in post-production. But other than that, eyes look awesome, great engagement with the camera, just a fantastic job all around. Let's take a look at this next image here. And this one was shot at f1.8, 1/400, I can't even talk today, 1/400th of a second, ISO 125. It was shot with a Sony a6000, which is a crop sensor, really affordable camera, with a 50mm 1.8, which is their version of a nifty 50. So very common for people to use this as a portrait lens, which of course 50mm on this camera body turns out to be about a 75mm, so it's a really good length for shooting portraits. So looking at this image here, I'm going to zoom in here. There's one thing that, let's talk about the good first. I think that the location is kind of interesting. This is something where when I first started in photography, there was a beautiful park near my house that had a lake. And I almost feel like this could have been the place that I used to shoot at, where I used to practice. And so it's a cool location. I like the color. You know, there's a nice saturation of colors in this image. I think the gentleman in the photograph, I don't know if it was the photographer or who it was, but he's got a interesting and a good expression on his face, which for me is one of the essential things of shooting portraits. Doesn't matter what gear you use. If you can't get an expression like this, you've got a little bit of a problem. So from that aspect, I would say that's really good. Some of the things to look at to improve this image, first and foremost to me, is the Redeye. I don't know what's happening here. It's kind of odd. I would assume that based on these settings, perhaps, let's see, aperture priority. Yeah, so you're getting some Redeye happening in your image here. This is something that you could correct in post-production. You do want to take the time to do that because the Redeye is probably not what you were trying to go for, unless you're trying to make him look like a Halloween themed type of character. But based on his wardrobe, that's not really, I don't think that's where you were going with it. So the Redeye is definitely one thing. The other thing is you could have had him actually stand a little bit to the viewer's right here, where it's just this open area, because where he is right now, you've got this tree that's just kind of growing out of his back. You've got a tree growing out of the top of his head. This branch here just kind of leads you back into the your subject, but it's leading me into his neck area. So I think from a rule of thirds perspective, I see that you kind of were trying to go for that because you have him a little bit off center, which is great, but unfortunately there's a tree behind him, and I think that it's taking away from how great this portrait could have been had you had him stand a little bit to the right. So that's one thing that I would have changed. The other thing, and I'm not sure if I could do this here within Capture One, but it looks like his shirt is a little bit overexposed, and so generally speaking in portraits and in images in general, your eyes tend to go to the brightest part of an image. And so for me, as soon as I opened up this file and I looked at it, I didn't look at his face. I looked at his chest area because it's a little bit bright. So what you want to be able to do is within post-production, you could do this within Capture One, you could do it within Lightroom. You can go to the highlight slider. You could actually recover a little bit of the highlights so that the shirt is not so bright. So even just bringing up the highlights a little bit, the face ends up being a little bit more prominent than the shirt. So that definitely helps quite a bit. Other than that, like I said, this is a really nice, really what I would call like a basic portrait. Like this is where you have a friend or family member who says, hey, could you take a headshot of me? I need to update my LinkedIn. This totally could have done the job. Just have them stand over to the side and you are on the right track. Let's take a look at the next image here. This one was shot at f2.2, 1/1000th of a second, ISO 250. And we'll check on the metadata here. And it looks like Sony 50mm 1.8. This is shot on the A6300, which is a little bit of a higher end model from Sony. Also crop sensor. So again, this 50mm is really more like a 75mm on this camera. And yeah, and those are the settings. So let's talk about this one. And I'm going to zoom into this here. And again, every time I'm doing my own portraits, I always zoom into the eyes because I always want to make sure that they're sharp and they're in focus. And for me here, it's kind of hard to tell for sure because this is a JPEG. It is a little bit of a lower resolution image, so I don't want to base it completely off of this, but just from experience of seeing a lot of images, JPEG images, this one looks like it's a little bit out of focus when I'm looking at the eyes. So that's the very first thing that I could say is you, again, make sure that the eyes are in focus. I'm going to sound like a broken record in my critiques, but this is something that you have to do when you are shooting portraits. Make sure the eyes are in focus. With the A6300, it's really easy because you do have eye autofocus. It does track. However, you have flexible spot autofocus, so you could just move the box over to the person's eye, push halfway down, and it will get the eyes in focus. So no reason not to get the eyes in focus if you guys are shooting Sony out there, because the tech does it for you. So anyway, carrying on. So the things that I do like about this image, This is like, man, it's like almost looking in the mirror in terms of my style. It's what I call my dramatic portrait series, where I would shoot portraits just like this on a textured background, really tight close up. I love the crop. I love the background. The styling on the model with the black leather, with the little flowers, her hair, her expression, all of that. Like, huge fan. Kudos to the photographer. And I say that because like this style like really speaks to me. This is what I love to shoot. However, if I was shooting this image and I look at it, and to kind of offer some critique here, first and foremost, besides the eyes being a little bit out of focus, at f2.2, you're getting a lot of the face out of focus here. And I'm not 100% sure if it's that it's out of focus or if this was post-processing that was done to this image to blur the skin. I'm going to venture to guess that it's probably a combination of the two. But you, again, just like with the first image we looked at, you want to make sure that you're not blurring the skin excessively, that you're not blurring it over and above what shooting at an f2.2 is going to do to an image. So in this case, if you shot this at 2.2 and you did not blur the skin, I would tell you that this would be another scenario where you may want to open or actually close down your aperture. Maybe go from 2.2 to 2.8 so that you can get more texture, so you can get some more of the hair, like the eyebrows and things like that, in focus, and so you can get more texture in the skin. The other thing is that if you look at the skin, it looks like there's a lot of areas that are overexposed. And so I'm not sure which light modifier you use to light this, but let me just play around here. So yeah, unfortunately this is a JPEG. So here's the other thing as well. If you are working with a JPEG image, it's pretty much near impossible for you to really do some heavy editing to your photo. You know, if this was the raw file, I'd be able to play with the highlights in this and kind of see if I could recover some of this. But if you look in the forehead area here, you look on the nose, I mean, this looks very, very overexposed. Right under the eye, also just very overexposed. So there's a couple of things that I would do if I shot my first image, which happens all the time. I'll take my first shot, I look at it, and if this is what I saw in the camera, I would be happy, first and foremost, that it's going in the direction that I want style-wise and things like that. But you have to control the highlights in your image. So this would be something where I would either feather the light away from the model. So if the light right now was, the center of your modifier was basically hitting right on the forehead, I would actually just kind of feather it away. So kind of rotate the light away from your subject so that the light is not hitting them so directly. The other thing that you could do as well is, and I do this all the time, is to take another layer of diffusion and put it over whatever your modifier is. So if you're using, and I'm just going to zoom in here, it looks like you had potentially two light sources. It looks like one might have been possibly like an octa or a beauty dish, and it looks like you had another modifier that was maybe acting as a fill source. So I would probably look to put another modifier over the main light just to soften the light and to diffuse it a little bit more. So really outside of that, the other thing that I would say is maybe you shot this one at ISO 250, which is okay. But I tend to want to try to shoot at a lower ISO, because what ends up happening is I'm going to zoom into the neckline here. And again, this could be JPEG artifacts. This could be you know, something that's just happening when you compress a file and make it into a JPEG. But if you look in the neck area, there's some greenish kind of tones here on the neck and the shadows. And when I've done this style where I shoot with high-speed sync, with off-camera flash in a studio, this tends to come when you're shooting in an environment that has overhead lighting, LED lights, fluorescent lights, tungsten lights, whatever. And if you don't negate those ambient light, if you don't negate the ambient light that's in that studio or in that area with your camera settings, what's going to end up happening is when your flash fires, you're going to have a mixture of flash, the light that's coming from your flash, and you're going to have a mixture of the lighting that is in your environment. And so the times where I've ended up having this like greenish type of tint in my photographs, it was because I was shooting with settings that was actually mixing the ambient light that was in my studio and the studio light. So make sure before you take your photos, turn the trigger off, dial in your setting of f2.2, 1/1000th of a second, and ISO 250 as you did in this image, but with the flash off, take a photo. You should see a completely dark image. If you don't, bring your ISO down. You could have probably gotten away with doing ISO 100 with these same settings, and it would have gotten rid of the ambient light in the room. Then you kick on your flash, then you start firing off. And what's going to end up happening is the only thing that's actually lighting your subject is going to be that off-camera flash, which in this case, again, I'm not 100% sure. I just know based off of my images in the past, when I've had these like greenish tints in the shadows, it's usually come from ambient light that's creeping into my image. So with that being said, the lighting is fantastic overall. Just not confuse it, but control it a little bit more so that it's a little bit softer, and I think that you have a fantastic image. Crop as well is really nice. I may have potentially just gotten a little bit more of the top of the hair by just like a tiny little bit. You don't have to have the like background showing above her hairline, but I would say if you would have cropped this up just a tiny bit more, that would have been kind of cool. But other than that, fantastic photo. Let's take a look at the next one here. And again, we have EXIF data for this. So it's shot at f1.8, 1/1600th of a second, and ISO 100. We'll click here on the metadata and we'll see this was shot with a Sony 85mm 1.8 lens on the A7R II. So just like with every portrait, we're gonna zoom in. All right, so we're zoomed in here, and there's a couple of things. So actually, let's talk about this one, the things that I like. I think that her expression is kind of cool. I think the lighting is dramatic. You know, it's got a moody, I don't know, man, it's like moody vibes, you know? I dig that. I dig the moodiness of the pose, the expression, the lighting. You know, I dig that. Like the background, it looks like it's kind of a gray texture background, which looks really cool. Her hair looks really nice. So those are some of the things that I do like about this portrait. And I think overall from a artistic sense that artistically it's a pretty nice portrait. Let's talk about the technical side of things. So the first thing is, again, zooming into the eyes here. We shot this one at 85 1.8. And so looking at the eyes here, it looks like the left eye actually is where the camera hit for the focus, because the viewer's right eye here, this one is really defocused, especially when you look at the two. It's out of focus compared to this eye on the left. What I tend to do when I'm shooting portraits like this wide open is I explain to my subject that I need both of the eyes to be parallel with one another. So what that means to you as a viewer is if you're shooting a portrait of me wide open at an f1.8, if I do this and your camera focuses on this back eye, this eye is going to be out of focus, right? Or if you focus on this eye is going to be sharp, this one's going to be out of focus. It's a little more acceptable to have the far away eye to be defocused. However, what's a little more preferable for my own work is to have both eyes to be parallel to one another, which means their noses pointing directly at the camera, like most of the time. And they could tilt this way or they could tilt this way, because by tilting side to side, no matter what, the eyes are parallel with one another. You still have them on the same focal plane, so both eyes will be sharp and in focus. In this case, one is a little bit kind of like forward and one is behind, and the camera actually focused on the farther eye, because technically this should be the closer eye to the camera, but it looks like it picked the back eye. So keep this in mind, that when you're shooting portraits wide open, whether they be in a studio or outdoors, you want to make sure that the eyes are parallel to one another. Now, as far as the retouch, this actually is quite a bit better than some of the other ones that I've been looking at so far. I could see some texture in the skin, which is great. There are some areas that are defocused because of the f1.8 aperture, but it looks like there's some areas that look like they were blurred as well, that were not part of what happened when you shot this at f1.8. So what I would invite you to do is to make sure that you shy away from blurring the skin. If anything, what you want to be able to do, and this is why having a makeup artist is like, when you're shooting portraits is so important. Having a good makeup artist, they will take care of a lot of the imperfections that you see in a portrait. So this would be a scenario where I would rely on my makeup artist to try to help to get rid of any type of blemishes or anything like that to cover that up. Because if you bring it into Photoshop and you try to blur those blemishes, it starts to become a little bit apparent that this is what happened. So for example, I'm looking at this eye here, and you notice that there's kind of like a strip of blur, and then you have an area here that has texture, and then you have like a strip right next to it of blur, and then you have an area of texture and a strip of blur, and there's just kind of blurry here. So this area for me is kind of like a sloppy retouch. So what I would tell you is this isn't something that happened in camera, because if you shot this at 85-1.8, you're not going to have like strips of areas that are focused and defocused like that. This to me is almost like a dead giveaway that there was some kind of smoothing that happened. Just the whole region right here. So spend a little bit more time. What I would do is I would take this image, if it were mine and I wanted to deliver this to a client, I would dial back whatever the processing was for the skin and just basically start that over, because you have a pretty good kind of like starting image to work with in terms of the pose and everything. It's just that skin blurring for me is a little bit of a thing. The other thing here as well is that, and this isn't wrong, this is just my artistic tastes. You have your subject wearing black and she's on a gray background. And so for me, what this almost looks like is, it almost looks like she's got a kind of like a floating head and a floating arm and floating hair. Because if you see this here, it's like there's no data, there's no kind of like information here. You have the hair, and then it's really dark here. You've got her face, you've got her shoulder, some hair here, her arm, but it's just really dark in this lower portion of the image. So you could crop into this a little bit more. So you could do something like, you know, something like this, for example, where, and this is totally just for demonstration purposes. I'm not saying to crop it like this afterwards, but in the camera, when you take the photo, you could have shot it a little bit tighter, especially with the 85-1.8. You can take a few steps closer and shoot tighter so that you don't have so much of this area. I mean, this is, the way that I look at this image is that there's approximately 40% of this image that has no data that's worth looking at. So if you look at this image, right, from here up, we're gonna say that's 60% of the image from here going up. There's a little portion, a little sliver of that 60% that has something that's really interesting to look at, but you have 40% that just has a black shirt that is not that interesting. So, at least to me. So what I would tell you is shoot this one a little bit tighter, a little bit closer, dial back a little bit on the skin smoothing, and you have a pretty stellar portrait. Let's take a look at the next one. And again, we have the EXIF data here. This one's shot at f2.8, 1/100th of a second, ISO 160. And this was shot on the Sony a7 III with a 90mm 2.8 macro, which in my own work, I call that thing Excalibur, because that lens is like ridiculously sharp. And surprisingly, I have said in some past videos that I thought the 90 macro, while it was really sharp, that the bokeh on that lens was not amazing. But I will say that this is a really good example of the type of bokeh that you can get in the right situation, in the right scenarios with that lens. So let's talk a little bit about this image. The very first thing, I do like the colors. I like the kind of like, I don't know if it's blue or teal, but that color with the red, with that kind of beige background, I think it looks super, super interesting. I think the expression is one that could have been interesting, like I'm a little bit conflicted with this, and I'll tell you why. So, generally speaking, when you're taking pictures of people, you don't want to shoot up their nose. And in this portrait, I'm having a really hard time because it looks like she has really gorgeous, really beautiful eyes. You know, it's kind of cool, and maybe this is what you were going for because I kind of see the reflection of the clouds in her eyes, which look kind of interesting. But I could also see up her nose, and I could see some detail there, even though it's blurry. So this is a scenario where I think what would take this image to another level would be if she just tilted her head down towards the camera. Of course, you would lose the reflection of the clouds in her eyes, but perhaps there's something behind her that's going to create really beautiful, really bright catch lights that might still look really great. I think maybe there's a little bit too much happening here from an artistic perspective where maybe you wanted to get the clouds, the reflection of that in her eyes, and then you also want to have this out of focus flower. She's got this hoodie on with her hair that looks awesome. She's got this like golden glow on her head. All of that is just so cool. I think the components of a great portrait are all here. I think that where it might have been missed a little bit is just in this like head tilt back. Because again, my eyes just go straight to those nostrils, and you don't want that in a portrait. You want them to, as a viewer, you want to manipulate people, right? It's going to sound really bad, but you want to manipulate them to look directly into your subject's eyes. And in this case, it's not working for that, but really easy to fix. Bring that head forward a little bit, and all of a sudden you have a completely different image. Focus looks like it was on point for the most part. I mean, again, it's kind of hard to tell with the head being tilted like that. Skin processing doesn't look like it was over the top. Obviously, when you're photographing a young child, you really don't have to do very much skin processing. That's kind of one of the benefits of photographing kids. But the crop as well, I guess because she's looking up, it's okay. However, generally speaking, I tend not to leave so much of the top of the image with basically just dead area. In this case, this is probably, I would say maybe 15 to 20% of the image that basically just has nothing to look at. And so it's just really hard for me as a viewer to look at this image and know where to look at. You know, you've got that bright red defocused area, you've got the nose, all of these things I'm sure is not what you want me to look at as a viewer. So just fix those couple of things, and I think you have a pretty cool portrait. And if you have the opportunity to photograph this subject again, I don't know if it's your child or family member or what it is, bring them back to this spot. Hopefully there's epic lighting like it looks like there is in this moment that you take this portrait, and just try to go for it again. Let's take a look at the next image here. And this one was shot at f4, 1/160th of a second, ISO 50. And let's take a look here and see. So this is the Sony a7 III. Looks like it was exported out using Portrait Pro. Lens, it says it's at 105 millimeters. So let's see. Okay, so it doesn't say which lens was used. So I'm going to assume if you shot this at f4 105 millimeter, it might have been maybe the 24 to 105 f4, or it could be a 70 to 200 f4 that was shot at 105 millimeter. But yeah, my money would be 24 to 105 f4 is probably what this was shot with. So let's talk about this. What I like right out of the gates, her expression, man. She's owning this. Like, she's owning the frame. Fantastic expression. Really interesting location with the, looks like there's just like little, I don't know if that's light or if maybe if there's some kind of item back there that just has some texture that the light is hitting it in a certain way. But I find that background to be really interesting because all of it just kind of brings you back into your subject and brings you, as a viewer, brings you back into her face. Makeup is on point. Subject is beautiful. Eyes, we zoom in and guess what? We have some eyes that where the main eye is in focus. And this is what happens when you have an eye that's in focus. I mean, look at that. You can see all of this detail. It looks like, I don't know, it looks like another universe. Like it's really, really beautiful. So in this case, we shot this at f4, and you know, I was mentioning this for some of the other images, but when you shoot a little bit stop down and you are photographing portraits like this, you tend to have the eyes where sometimes they're a little bit defocused if you have that whole like head turn. But you can see at f4, it's not as blurry as it would have been if you shot this at f2 or f1.8. That eye back there would have been just completely obliterated. And in this case, I mean, it's not completely focused, especially when you look at this eye and you see how sharp that is. It's a little bit defocused, but it's not a bad thing, right? It's not like you wouldn't lose marks in my book for doing it this way, but because there is a pretty good amount of detail. It looks like this was done with off-camera lighting. I would venture to guess that because of the 1/160th of a second shutter that you didn't have high-speed sync. But I could see the softbox there that was used. Maybe it was an LED light, I don't know. But anyway, lighting looks really nice. Expression looks great. If I have to critique this to say to get this to be a little bit better, I'm just kind of going through the skin here, and I would venture to guess, because it says Portrait Pro, that you probably used Portrait Pro to do the skin retouching. This is a fairly decent example of how you can use Portrait Pro to not totally cartoonize or to totally animate your portrait to where they don't look human anymore. I think she looks very, very human in this portrait. Some of the things that I'm seeing that I think Portrait Pro is not going to fix, there's some green areas here, so you can kind of see there's like a, I wish I had my pen here and I would draw this on the screen, but you could just kind of follow the hand here. This whole area here, going up this way, and then if I go across the image, this area here is a little darker, but it's got kind of a greenish tone, and then here, going up, here, down here, there's just like green, you know, right here, some right there. And then in the forehead, I think as I was scanning, I saw it here too. So you've got kind of like a line of green here, some green tones in there. You can't see it when you're looking at the image as a whole, but as soon as you zoom in, all of a sudden now you can start to see these things. So it's kind of an easy thing to fix. If you go into Photoshop, you can add a hue saturation layer. You can adjust the sliders so that it targets just those areas that have those greenish tones. And maybe you offset it a little bit with adding some yellow, adding a little bit more magenta, and then you can just brush in those areas so that you won't have those greenish tones. Sometimes this happens if you're taking portraits and let's say you're in a, I don't know, you're at a park or something and she's standing in the grass. If the sun is hitting that grass, it's going to bounce back and you're going to catch some of those green tones in the skin. So it's kind of a minor critique or a major critique depending on how you look at it, but I would definitely correct those. The good thing is that is something that can be fixed in post-production. The other thing too, and this is really simple, probably just take you a few minutes, this hair back here kind of takes away from how neat and how clean and like with the makeup and everything being on point to the extent that it is. I would just use the clone stamp tool and just get rid of this hair back here, because when you look at it as a whole, this kind of stands out to me compared to other parts of the image. But other than that, I think this is a really, really nice portrait. It was very well done, great lighting, great subject. You chose good settings, and so kudos to you for this portrait. Let's go to the next one here. And we don't have the EXIF data on this one, so this is one that we're just going to have to go based off of, I'm going to have to guess here at from the technical side of things what was done here, but we'll just kind of zoom in. I'm just going to look around here really quick. All right, so there's a couple of things here. So first thing is, wow, for the lighting. Really beautiful, looks like a golden hour type of portrait that was shot here. Stunning model, looks like she was styled really well. She's got a beautiful dress on, she's got beautiful earrings, makeup is done, hair looks beautiful, lighting, location, all of this stuff is all working really well with this portrait. Makeup looks good from what I could tell as well. Like the colors, the choices that were picked for this were pretty nice. Some of the things that I'm looking at here, and again, I'm basing this off of a JPEG, which has been compressed, but we're gonna zoom in here. And the first thing that kind of jumps out at me, there's kind of like a, I don't know how, if this is like a processing thing, and I'm gonna venture to guess that it is, but when I say processing, it could be a retouching thing, or it could be just a JPEG compression thing. And for you, if you're watching this and you shot this image, which I'm sure you are because you submitted this, you know basically how you got about doing this. But this almost has like a newspaper print quality to me. It looks like, when I look at it from far away, it looks like it should be really detailed. It looks like I should see something really excellent when I zoom in. But when I zoom in, and especially when I start looking at this like chin area with the lips, it almost looks like I'm looking at this not on a computer screen, but looking at it on a like newspaper, like looking at it on paper. And it's, I don't know, it's just lacking in this like punch of quality that I would like to see in my portraits. Looks like you used off-camera lighting because I could see the catch lights in the eyes, which is cool. The processing looks like it was a little bit heavy-handed. I know part of this is probably from, like, the blur is coming from your choice of aperture, which is totally fine. But it just looks like there were some areas here that they're just, yeah, let me zoom in here. Like, you can really see it here in this cheek area. Maybe you can or can't because this is a video, but take my word for it. When you look at this cheek area, it almost looks like an oil painting. So if you're trying to go for that effect, then cool. Disregard what I'm saying. If you're trying to go for that oil painting look, I think you got it, right? However, if you're trying to go for a kind of like a high quality, high resolution, high detail type of image, just a good all-around portrait, I would say that change up the processing here because it's degraded this JPEG quite a bit. There's also a couple of little bumps here that honestly within a few minutes you can go into post-production and go into Photoshop, use your healing brush and just go over these little dots here, these few blemishes. She will love you for doing this. But yeah, other than that, I think her expression is cool. I think the mood is really good. It's a really nice portrait. The way it was composed is really nice. Just really, again, post-processing sometimes makes or breaks an image. In this case, you had what I would call a banger in the camera, like it's a great image. You don't have to do that much in post-production when you have an image that looks really good out of the camera. This would be one where it just needs minimal work. You know, and I didn't see the raw file, so I'm guessing a little bit, but just based off of what I'm seeing here, I think this didn't require too much retouching. And there's a couple of things that got left out, so retouch those things, dial back on whatever that oil painting type of processing is to this image, and I think you have a great shot. One other thing too, on the back of her dress, you've got the button. I would clone stamp this out because if you look at the back here, you could see those things. Like it stands out pretty, you know, obviously it's a different color, so it stands out. You really want your viewers, again, to focus on the face, focus on the expression, and because this is all like a light color and then you just see a black circle, my eyes tend to go to that. So really quick with the clone stamp tool, you can get rid of that, and you have, again, a really beautiful portrait. So let's go to our next shot here. And we have another portrait with a great connection with the camera. I love portraits that kind of talk to me. You know, if I look at the person in the portrait and I feel like they're trying to communicate something with their eyes or with their expression, I'm a huge fan. So kudos to the person that shot and took this image because I think her expression was really well captured. think the location was kind of, it's one of those locations where it's very simple. It's just like a doorway with brick around it, but it works for this particular shot. With the hair, the way that it was done, where she has the hair kind of like over her back shoulder, and then you have all the hair on this side kind of flowing. Really beautiful. Beautiful choice of color of makeup. It's not super over the top. Really highlights her blue eyes, which is great. I mean, overall, my immediate impression of this portrait is to say that it's super nice. Let's zoom in here. And of course, I don't have the EXIF data for this one, so I can't say for sure what the settings are. But here is a shot where you get the eyes in focus. And you can tell this is a very shallow depth of field shot because you've got the foreground being defocused and you got the background really defocused, right? So very shallow depth of field, or it could have been shot on a longer lens as well. But either way, you got that close eye in focus. And I like how the hair is covering this back eye. So it's kind of a cool thing that you can do if you're shooting in such a way where that back eye is going to be defocused. Put some hair over it, so that way you don't really see it. You know, this is a great example of how you handle that situation. Skin processing, it's a little bit soft, but again, that could be because of the settings that you used. However, I don't think that it's anything that is bad. I mean, the skin processing here looks pretty good. You can still see some texture in the areas that you need to see it. I mean, I'm kind of just scanning around here. There are some areas like this area here where you can see a little bit of like darker, almost like a greenish tone in the skin, which again could just be actually here on the chin. There's a line right here. There's a little bit of green here. So there's some spots like here on the forehead where again you could take a hue saturation layer and you can basically remove that in post-production. But geez, I mean, that's really like the most that I could say to be able to like try to improve a portrait like this. As it is, I would be happy to deliver a portrait like this to my client if I was working with her. It's a really beautiful shot. Very, very well done. Kudos to you. Looks like Herbert Vicente. Very, very nicely done. Let's take a look at our next shot here. And again, no EXIF data, so it's going to be a little bit hard for me to talk about the technical side beyond what I can tell looking at a JPEG image, but just kind of seeing it from far away. So we've got a guy in the studio. Looks like he's really well dressed. He's got a nice jacket, nice shoes. Styling on this looks kind of interesting. Looks cool. The lighting is very dramatic. Looks like maybe he's sitting in front of a doorway or something. And I know this is studio lighting, but just kind of the mood that it evokes. His expression looks nice. You got some light in the eyes, which I really like. Even if you have an image that is lit dramatically, as you do in this shot, you do want to try to make sure that you get the eyes to have a little bit of light in them. And so the photographer here did a really good job to get some light in the eyes, which I really like. Some of the things that, from what I could tell, I mean, it looks like the eyes and everything's in focus. I would venture to guess this was shot at a higher aperture, which is why you have so much more that appears to be in focus and detailed. But as I kind of scan through this, there's a couple of things. I think, again, I can't see the EXIF data, but I think this was shot with a wider lens and that the photographer was closer to the subject, because the legs here appear to be very long. And again, this is just my eyes. This is what I'm seeing. Looks like the legs look really long. His pose, almost like if I blurred my eyes and just looked at this, it looks almost like, how can I put this without sounding mean? So from the waist down, it looks like you have two different people. It's like you have these really long legs, and I picture somebody sitting straight up, but then when I look at him, he's kind of like this towards the camera. And so it looks like you have half of a body put on top of someone else's legs because of that perspective to the camera. So in order to fix this. If you used a wider lens and you were shooting closer to him, I would advise getting a little bit farther away, shooting him with a longer lens, and just giving yourself some space above and below the subject, so like above their head, which you did get some area there, but underneath here, you see you're clipping the tip of the shoe there. I would have given a little bit more margin above and below, and you're able to do that if you shoot with a longer lens. The other thing is that, again, the camera perspective sometimes tricks people's eyes. In this case, just have them sit up. You know, kind of having him forward in this way is just really throwing me off. It's one of those things where it's like once you see it, you can't unsee it. So, and especially because it's so dark in this region here, it just really looks like he could be standing behind a counter and like there's just legs that are just popping out. So, you know, other than that, I would say the styling was great. The lighting looks interesting. Have him sit up, shoot him with a longer lens, and I think this image would be like at least 60-70% better. But it's a really, really nice portrait. So let's see, we have 1, that was 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. All right, so that means we have one more image, and this is our final image for this video. We're gonna have another critique that's gonna be happening here soon for the additional 10 images. But so let's take a look at this one. This one, so I am gonna say first and foremost as I look at this one, I'm a new fan of using gels, and I think that if you use it the right way, it can make for a really interesting portrait. And in this case, I love the use of the lighting and the gels in this shot. It just adds, I don't know, it just adds something a little bit extra to the shot that maybe without the gels, it might have been a little bit boring. It just adds a little bit of mood to the shot, which I really like. Your subject, obviously, beautiful subject, beautiful eyes, great makeup. I dig the vibe. It's like a kind of a moody portrait, and I dig that. Let's talk about some of the things that are kind of jumping out at me. If I zoom into the eyes, this is something that used to happen to me all the time, and it took me a little while to kind of identify it and try to fix it in my own work. When you're photographing somebody in low light scenarios, you're gonna get this, where the iris opens up like crazy so that they can see. And this happens to us. Like if you are in a dark room and you know, you're able to see your iris, it's gonna be like wide open. Compare this iris, for example, to this one where you see it's closed, you see more of the color of your subject's eyes. Here you can see it is super dilated. It's like she just went to the eye doctor and got her pupils dilated. It's just too much in this case. Really easy to fix. What I end up doing is I get my cell phone if I'm shooting in low light like this, and what I'll end up doing, and this might seem kind of weird, but I'll turn the light on and I just put light on their eyes, and you'll see that straight away when you do this that it closes down. So try to do that, and if you were using a studio light, put the modeling lamp on because it will help so that basically their pupils don't open up that much in such a low light type of environment. That's the first thing, and the reason why you want to do that is that usually when your pupils are this dilated, it's a sign of, like, sometimes when people are on drugs or under the influence of drugs, their pupils will be super dilated. So that's why you'll see when police officers, when they pull you over at night and they suspect that you've been driving drunk or you're under the influence, they get the flashlight and they flash you in the face. They want to check to see if your eyes look like that, because before you even say where you've been, what you've been doing, blah, 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 your eyes give away if you are under the influence of some kind of drugs. And I don't know, maybe she was. Maybe you guys were like hanging out and smoking weed or something, and that's what happened. I don't know. I'm not judging. I'm just saying, in your portraits, generally speaking, especially because it looks like she has blue or green eyes, they're, I'm going to assume, very beautiful. Just from the little bit that I can see on this like bottom edge of her eye. But just put some light in there. I want to see more of that. I want to see less pupil and more of that beautiful color of her eye. Pose is really nice. Again, the lighting is great. Expression is kind of interesting. It's almost kind of like she's looking at you as the viewer, and you're just telling her a story, and she's just like enthralled by your story. So I really love that. Really, I would say that's probably the biggest thing that I could tell from a JPEG image to say you should look to try to fix this the next time you try to shoot this. Skin processing, it looks like you shot this relatively wide open. And I could kind of tell just from the defocused area, the hair back here looks super blurry. So given that and given the lighting, I think the skin processing works just fine. But again, really easy to take this image from from where it is right now to like a much higher level. Just make sure that you keep an eye on the eyes, because if they're out of focus or if the pupils are really dilated, that's really going to throw off your viewers, especially if they know how to identify those types of things. So that is our first critique session, our Qritiques. So hopefully this helped you guys out. I want to know in the comment section below of this video, number one, what was your favorite portrait of the portraits that I've shown you here in this video? And what did you really agree? Like, was there anything that you heard that you were like, I never thought of that? If you did, leave it in the comment section below. If you heard me critique something and you think I am 1000% wrong, I got it wrong, whatever the case might be, leave that feedback in the comment section below. And if you caught something else on any of these images that you think is like a glaring omission, please, by all means, leave that in the comment section below as well. Again, join Improve Your Photography on Facebook, because I'm planning on doing these critique sessions at least 1 to 2 times a month. And obviously I'm going to be calling on you guys and gals, of course, to submit your images so that I can critique them. Hopefully you guys found this helpful. And most of the time, what I've seen with really all of these images is that it's just like 1 or 2 little things that could take an image from being okay to being a really stellar, really great portrait. So with that being said, keep shooting, keep practicing, keep taking beautiful, beautiful portraits, no matter what gear, no matter what lighting, no matter what it is that you're using. Just get out there, keep shooting. I want to see those images, post them in the group, post your EXIF data, because that really helps me to be able to critique your photos as well moving forward. So thanks so much for watching this first episode, and make sure you subscribe as well while you're here, because I have new videos coming out just about every single week. So please subscribe. That really, really helps out. Click that thumbs up button as well if you enjoyed this content. Again, this takes time out of my day to produce this content that I could be doing anything else, right? But I really am passionate about helping you guys to improve your photography, to get better, so that whatever your dreams are to pursue in photography, that you're able to do that. So anyway, rambling. See you later. Thanks for watching.